everybody for coming to our September chapter meeting. For those of you that have been with us over the past couple of months, we've been having a series on development best practices. So today is the third topic in that series, and in a little bit I'll introduce our distinguished MVPs, UiPath MVPs that have joined us today. But if you've been with us with any of our other sessions, you've already heard from them as well. So, and I'll also go over the topic that we're going to be covering. But if you've missed any of the other sessions, and this is your first one today, thanks for being with us. And you can always go back and look at the prior to in this series that we've hosted. So if you need any information about that, I'm happy to share those links with you as well. It's been a great series and full of a lot of really interesting information, I think, for everyone that's been able to join us. Let me go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Courtney Dominguez. With me is Tracy Dixon. We are the leaders of the South Florida chapter. And so we're with you every month. We normally do this on Tuesdays at noon. So if we can mark your calendar on that, our next event will be posted soon. So this is myself. Tracy is a longtime MVP, so happy to have her as one of our organizers and also one of our speakers today. Behind the scenes, we've got Jensen and Diana. They help us keep things organized and make sure that we stay on track. So we appreciate their help in getting these events out there and in the community. And today, our guests we've got 3 MVPs in addition to Tracy. We've got Dan Fishkin, Mason Turvey, and Nicholas Ehrlichman. And again, they've been with us the past couple of sessions in this series, so we really appreciate them coming back for this third one to give us more great insight on development best practices. So with that, our topic for today is going to be covering our UiPath best practices for process architecture. And we're going to be we've planned a number of demos as well. So for those of you that are looking for something interactive, we've got some demos planned. We also, as always, will be taking questions and answers. So for those of you that are comfortable unmuting, you're welcome to unmute and present your question. And otherwise, if you're not able to do that, you can drop the question in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that so that we can make sure we get your questions answered. And this is being recorded and will be distributed along with the material. So, if you're watching this not watching this in real time, we have the link that will be out there and distributed to everyone as well. So with that, Tracy, should I turn it over to you to start some of our discussion topics on reusability and best practices?
That sounds good. And if I randomly disappear on video, it's because Debbie is doing that. It's telling me. So I'm still here. Right. So this is just going to be a roundtable discussion, and like Courtney said, free to just step and ask questions throughout, or to have a particular topic expanded. We just have a few things we'll cover today, and then we'll get into some hands-on time with demos. So first up, for the group, explain the principle of modularity and how it contributes to scalability and maintainability for automations. Mason, you want to weigh in first?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So modularity to me is really building any kind of component that you can use in multiple automations. And I think some of the earliest examples of that you run into in an RPA program are your RAF kind of your reusable framework components, like interacting with queues, data tables. There's different like utility things that you're using constantly throughout a process automation that you could probably abstract into a reusable component. But then you think about whatever business you're working at, you probably have some applications that you're using day in, day out. Maybe certain interactions with those are like a reusable component. One of the ones that I think came to mind earliest when we were talking about this session was like a login for a website or any application that needs a login flow. That's something that could be built as a reusable component. And the way that it comes back and contributes to your scalability and maintainability is when you make that as a reusable component. So we talked about libraries in the test-driven development part of the series. When you make that as a library component, you can update that component directly, the source code of that component, and push that to all of your processes. So say you have 30 processes logging into the same application the same way with the same credentials. You can make that part of a library component, an activity in a library, and they all call that library activity. And then when you need to update that, say the login selector changes or for some reason, then you can change that selector in the library and push that out to all of your processes. And it's a much easier way to scale out that change rather than going in and changing the code the same way every time for all 30 of those processes.
Dan or Nico, anything to add on that?
Nico, your mic's not picking up.
Yeah.
I see you're talking, but I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, like muting from the whatever. No, it's just saying like that pretty much covers everything that it has to do with that.
What about the maintainability piece? Why would keeping the procedures modular help it be more maintainable or for you to scale in the future?
That helps in many ways. First of all, it'll helps you because when you need to like maintainability is a thing that is super important to only change what you need to change. So let's say you have a workflow that goes, for example, into, I don't know, 20 different screens, and you have everything in, or like 2 different functions in your system, and it's everything in one same workflow. So let's say you need to update something on that. If you didn't modularize it in different like workflows specifically for what you wanted to do, every time that you need to change something, you need to change the whole workflow. So you either can touch something that you shouldn't. It's also going to be more difficult to find what you need to update in that workflow. And also it makes it harder for people who need to maintain it to know where to change some things. So let's say you're going to a huge process with 100 activities and you just need to update one specific thing. And it's a project you don't know, you're just maintaining it. It's the first time. It's going to be a lot harder to just find and like fix it instead of you only have like a specific workflow that it's called, I don't know, um, transaction X, let's say. So you know that you need to change that. So it's easier to find, easier to change, and also a lot harder to introduce any mistakes that could potentially like break anything else besides of what you want to do. And also if that change needs to be done in different projects, you can only do it once and then push that update if you did it as a library, for example, and don't need to make that change in every other process that you have it.
All right, Dan, anything to add on this one?
I would just add, the back end doesn't change as often as the front end. If you think about any website you've gone to, there you just notice that even almost like seasonally, the user experience will change, and so keeping that in mind, our selectors are going to change. And if you start building an automation on a business site, the business might come back and they might ask you for 5, 10 more automations. And at that point, that one minor website change could crash all these automations. So modularity is huge because that one change on the website, you're playing cat and mouse, right? So you don't want to have to scale the response. So if it's just one change and you only have to make one change, then life is a little easier. But if they can make one change and then you have to make 10 changes, then some fatigue is going to start to set in. And so I think you'll find this with not only UiPath but almost every you come across. Like modularity is key. It's going to It's the key to sustainability as a developer. So that's what I would add.
Great. Next question. How does the emphasis on... Are you guys getting echo? Okay, it's better. How does the emphasis on building reusable components help a project's overall success? Maybe we can start with you, Nico.
Yeah, so first of all, in your first project, probably you're not going to see most of the benefits since it's probably going to take you a little bit longer to make those reusable components and even just like if it's the first time that you're doing it. So like this is just one thing that you need to consider, like don't be discouraged if that happens the first time. But as soon as you need to reuse this stuff, like second time, third time, fourth time, then you're reaping the benefits like every other process that you start making, every time that you need to update, every time that you need to maintain. So the benefits is not something that you get in the short term, but it's something that you're going to get over time. And the more you need it, the more benefits you get from it.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. That's reusability and scalability isn't like something that you necessarily are getting right from the start. Like you're not going to get that right away, but it's kind of a learning process of doing what saves you time down the line, and it's those little things like just those little 10% gains over time, those little 1% to 10% gains over time save you, they snowball over time and they save you a lot of time later on down the road. And they also help you ideate new solutions and new ways of like making development practices, and take your game to the next level when you're building out these bots. So it doesn't necessarily help the project that you're starting it with, but it will help you speed up the projects past that that hit on those same things and use those same components. If you have 10 projects all hitting the same endpoints, then having that reusable component is going to save you that time that over the course of those 10 projects. And there's just the practice of building things in a reusable way is also kind of a different way of thinking. So the more you do it, the more comfortable and familiar you become with it, and the more that's going to snowball, and you're going to be able to build these things faster, and just automatically reap those rewards.
Do any of you have any times in the past where this has not been employed and you suffered from it? Anything like that that you can share?
Yeah, I think every automation program that I've came into, like from day one, just hasn't done this. And so that's been consistent across the board. They don't really use reusable components. And it depending on the scale of the program at that point, it just shows how much time they're wasting, like doing like changing a selector in 5 different places, or maintaining processes that could have been broken out and to be more modular. And you can certainly get by without it, but scaling your program and growing past a certain point is very difficult, right?
Yeah, even going to something as basic as having your own template. So we've seen at least most of the clients that I work for, like the framework, the basic framework always needs to add something specific for the organization. Let's say you need some specific logs, emails, or whatever. So again, reusability, scalability is not only about modularization or libraries and everything. It goes just from the start, even from the template that you're using. And I've seen it a lot of times where you don't have a template and you end up doing like 20 times the same thing. And it's okay, you'll do it, it's no trouble. But as long as you have more and more processes, it's going to consume a lot of time that you could have just used in improving your solution. Plus, also, whenever you need to change that, it's going to be a real headache.
Right. So Dan, you'll be first on this next round. Can you talk through some of the key factors that help you figure out that a given component or that contribute to the scalability of a component and the automation? So what makes it scalable in the long term?
So I guess it's keeping it robust. You might have one activity that, if you're going use this one activity 1,000 times, then it makes sense to more time on that one activity, like the activities. Then we divide our time. But this is like we could add some try catches, exception. We could a couple of different kinds. We could add more logic in to handle areas. So you can make one action really sophisticated, and that allows you to scale, because as we scale, we might, if we do something 1,000 times, there might be some variants popping up, and as they do, you want to go ahead and make sure they're accounted for. So it's, I guess to summarize, it's, you're going to do this thing, you're going to accomplish this task, but there might be a few different ways of doing it. There could be some scenarios that you encounter while you're performing this activity. And so if you bolt on all this other logic and handling, then I think that would be the key to when the scalability comes, you'll be ready.
So does that end up impacting your estimating your automation, your development time?
Could you say that one more time?
Does the reusable and scalable components, how does that impact your development time and future automations that might share those activities?
So on the first project, it's taking more time, but you get the as you work on more and more projects on that platform, then the development time goes down. So you're making an upfront investment, and you might even need to modify it slightly as you work on more projects. But the key will be that this this activity almost represents like this, like a shared knowledge or wisdom, because you're not rebuilding the wheel every time. But in order to do that, you have to put some upfront, cost. You gotta budget that in.
Right, Nico or Miss out there?
Yeah, I think like the most important thing is, again, you need to think about this from the start. If you try to do this when the whole project is already finished, then instead of like getting benefits from it, you're gonna just be spending more time than you should. But if you do it right from the start, then again, you're gonna be seeing like a lot decreasing a lot in your development efforts, just because you don't need to be doing it every time. Plus, also, it's a good thing because you can also like do things in tandem. So you can have someone working in another project that actually needs the same thing that you do. They could be developing the library while you continue to build other parts of your solution. So whenever the library is ready, you can just reuse it. And that will save you so much time in development. And again, you don't, you'll have that tested again if you use also TDD, as Mason talked in the previous session. That would allow you to test your libraries like all the time continuously. So you'll also be able to cut mistakes or bugs before they happen and be able to solve them easily. So that also, it's always cutting into the development time. Either it's because you're developing your solution faster, or because you're like fixing your bugs uh, before you actually had the huge headache.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like even if you're not going to reuse the component again, it's still something that's running in production, and if you can catch that exception or catch whatever issue is going to happen first before it happens with a reusable test, that's a big one. So you can catch it before it happens and impacts production, but you can also create like a more specific way of finding that exception. If there's a test case that tests specifically for that scenario and that's the thing that breaks, then you already kind of have some initial like place. You have the place you need to look to fix that, right? And that's like what half to 75% of my debugging time is spent doing is finding the exception. It's in one of these processes that's a very long linear process. If it was made modular in the first place, right, my testing would have pointed me to the issue much faster and I would have saved a lot of time. So even if it's one project that's using these modular components, you're going to save yourself time and maintenance down the line on just that project rather than even thinking about it reusable across other projects.
And then a final question here. Can you guys talk about the criteria that help you determine whether or not a specific component, whether that be UI or an activity, a procedure, whether they're going to be made to be reusable or not? How do you decide that?
So I think that's a hard thing to do unless let's leave out anything that's pretty obvious. But I think first of all that comes from practice. Like as long as you start building automations and you continue to do it, you're going to be spotting those cases easily. But as a thumb rule, it's if it's something that it's in your core system and it's not something super specific to a process you're doing, then you probably should be safer just building the reusable solution. Um, Again, it's not going to be that much harder to build the reusable solution when you're used to doing it. So you won't lose so much time if you did it as a reusable component and then you didn't reuse it in anything else. So you're probably just going to spend a little bit more effort. And in the cases you don't see any benefits, that's it. But if you actually get the benefits, it's going to be so much better to just decide to do that process. But otherwise, I think the basic idea is if you didn't do it on the first part, the second time that you need to do it, then just build a component and update the previous process. So it'd be the first time, it would be like track, let's say, that you build something specifically, but the second time is already a method that you want to apply that way. And that time is when you just go build a reusable component, then go back and update the previous process. At least that's the way if you didn't spot it in the first time you did it.
And just to add to that, you can all like going back to something you built. It's like it's already there. You're sort of upgrading that thing and then applying it to both areas. So if it's not modular yet, you can always come back and turn it into something that's modular and reusable. It just comes down to like, do I want to do this thing? Is this thing that I'm doing now, is it similar to something I've done in the past? And like, hey, like, do I really want to do this again? They're so similar when I could, go back to something I already know that works, update it to work on this variant, and then apply it to both.
Yeah, this is one where I think kind of like an engineering approach to it. Like I think, does this thing save me time if I do it? Or does it like save me headache down the line? Does it make it more maintainable, or does it just save me time in rebuilding this same piece over and over again? And then that's like for me, right? Because I'm a little selfish. I want to save myself time with everything that I automate. But then I think about like, how does this impact the business? Does this improve the quality of the automation that I'm delivering? Does it help me, prevent issues? Does it help me communicate things out to stakeholders better? Like, what is the actual tangible benefit of this? And do all of my processes have the potential to take advantage of that? And then that's like the other side of reusable components for me, because I think there's things that all processes can do, like sending a report at the end of the process to stakeholders. Like that's something that can be built as a reusable component. And there's a lot of different facets to it. So that when I'm looking at it, I take those two different sides of it. Like, how does it help my stakeholders, and then how does it help me as a developer? And those are the two criteria that I kind of lay it against.
Great, thanks, guys. So Dan's having some trouble with his local setup, so I'm going to cover the first piece, which is converting a process file to library activities, and then I'll hand it over to Nico and Mason to wrap up. So let me attempt to share my screen. Courtney, I think you may have to stop there. All right, let me know when you can see.
We can see it.
Okay, great. And you can see the UiPath Studio, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is actually the library that I've been growing for a while. So the ability to, so setting up a reusable component is really very similar to what you would do already, but you're making sure that that component goes into a library, which you can then publish and use as a package, whether that be publicly or just locally, either way. So it's important to create a project to begin with if you don't have a library, just by choosing library here in the components. So once you've done that, the real difference between having a library and a typical process is that there's no main. You don't see a starting point here. This is not like an end-to-end process, but a place that you would put different XAML files, different procedures once you've decided that they're worth reusing in the future. So for me, just as a general policy, anytime that I make a procedure that opens an application, that closes an application, or anything that's a major piece of a framework that I can make that way, I've got those in the library. So init all settings, for example, I think a lot of you guys would be familiar with that from RE framework. I've got that set up with some additional enhancements that I like to use. So I think it's also important to make sure that you've got arguments where there's nothing that would be specific to any given project, but those are things that you would convert to arguments. So the config path, for example, I wouldn't want to set that up specifically because it will change project to project. So I make sure that that's an argument that I can pass along and then create what I want. So for this procedure, for example, instead of it being the traditional init all settings, I've got additional things in there where I can pass into it environment variables. So once I figured that out the one time, I'm able to use that universally in the future. It also looks to see if I've got the config file open, and if it does, it closes that specific config file without it killing Excel and other things that I may have open, because I noticed that I left it open a lot as I was changing things in the configuration and so on. So not only is it reusable, but it's kind of the next level customized version that I like to use that makes my life easier and saves me time, where I don't have to set up particular, like my username on that device in the config file, because I can use the environmental variable that's built in, for example. So all that I do as I have this library created is pretty much copy and paste whatever XAML file I've created elsewhere, and then make sure to turn over anything that might have been customized to that specific project, morph that into an argument that I can pass along. So on the open procedures, for example, there's typically always going to be an argument for the credential, either in Orchestrator or the credential store. And sometimes I give the option, so I don't have to worry about it being tied to a specific username and password. And then anything that I think I can morph so I don't have to recreate it again in the future, I do. And I have seen a lot of people, at least at our org, have standard helper type procedures where they have the few that they copy again and again. Any of those are typically good candidates for the library. If you find yourself copying and pasting something another time, then you might want to consider whether or not to put that in a library. And the way that you actually create the library, so once you've put the procedure in here and you've tested it and it works the way that you want to, the process of actually publishing the library is just clicking the publish button like normal. There can be at times some additional errors, at least in our world, if you send it to Orchestrator. So if you do have issues with that, I'll show you the option to just do a custom save location, which could just be your normal machine drive. You can save it there, and then you could either publish it to Orchestrator yourself or put it on some other share tool, that type of thing. So I know for me, my library is constantly grown. I'm regularly adding to it, so I don't have to go recreate something that I've already done in the past. And so you may want to consider setting up folders if you plan to put a number of things in there, so it's not just a whole giant list of procedures. which will also show up when you publish the package. So whenever this finishes, all you do pretty much is the typical publish process. There will be some internal checks to make sure that that's possible. And then you either choose to put things in the library feed, or if you choose custom, it's just a matter of either choosing a custom NuGet feed, or you could pick somewhere, say I want to put it on my C drive. I can just select that and it will just create a version of that NuGet package locally. And then these are choices that you can choose, or just leave the default is what I typically do. And you would press publish if I picked a directory that it likes. So what that does for you is just create a NuGet package, and it'll actually list, as long as you put it in a location that you've got listed in managed packages, then that library will actually show up. So these are the prior ones that I've published, where it's just the same exact set of activities of you going and finding a package anywhere and installing it. Maybe your organization has policies against that. If so, I'd probably keep the files local. That way you're not going out to any feed to grab them. But this is ready and ready to update. So each time that I publish it, it will increment in version numbers, and I'll see it listed along with everything else. If the project that I use in the future does have that as a dependency, it will look just like the rest of these, where once it sees a library update, it'll recommend upgrading those as well. Any questions on that? All right, I'll stop sharing here, but feel free to send questions along if you have any.
Thanks, Tracy. I think the next demo that we had was going to be with Nico and the demonstrating creating a custom activity from an API.
Are you on mute again, Nico?
Yeah, this is so bad. Okay, so let me try to share my screen. Can you see it? I don't know.
So I have to say, what Nico is going to show you is like my single favorite thing to do in automation. It gives you a ton of functionality, and it's way quicker and easier than anyone would think. So I love and use this all the time, the service activity in the library.
Can you see my screen?
I can see my
Or not?
face on a screen. I don't know if it's yours yet or not.
Now? I don't know if you're seeing
No,
Studio or not.
No.
not yet.
I don't know, because I'm clicking share, but it's not doing anything. This new platform from Bevy. Let me just reload.
Not unless you have like the Bevy screen. If you have a screen that's just Bevy in our picture, then maybe it is just sharing the wrong screen.
I think we may have just lost Nico.
Oh, well, hopefully he'll be back shortly. Mason, you want to cover your piece?
I'm actually having some technical difficulties right now as well. I'm trying to open Studio, but it keeps opening Studio X, and I don't even have Studio X installed. I'm not sure how this is happening.
Oh, you just go to Profile, Settings, and License and Profile, and change Profile.
Where's that at?
In Studio.
Can you see now?
Oh, yeah, we can see your screen now.
Okay, cool. So basically, I'm just easily going to show you one thing for how we can build a connector, which is go to the cloud.uipath.com, and here we have the integration service. And we have many ways of building connectors. So basically, to create a new connector, we can either start from blank and just create and define everything manually, or we can even start from an API definition. I'm going to show how we can import this, and then I'm going to show one that I already created just to so you can see how to use it, authentication and everything. But basically here we can do two ways. We can either do just from a URL. So let me just get this. So this is, for example, the Trello one. We can either get the Open API URL or either the Postman collection. And when we create this, we can either put, again, the URL of the Swagger JSON, for example, or even the Postman collection if it's live, or just upload it from a file. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to show two. But here we have the Postman collection from Trello. We can just define here, we can define our own name, for example, Trello demo. We're going to find here the description. We can put an icon that we want. This is super helpful for when we go to then integration service to be able to actually differentiate not only by the name. Let's just create it like this. And depending on what the file is, you are either going to see here the records imported, like the different applications and stuff that you have, or not. So I wanted to show this one because you are going to see some cases where you just define this, for example, for Trello, and you're not able to actually get anything here. So you need to actually create it manually. I already have created for you to show you. But one of the things that we can show, and we have these cases, for example, so we can create one from local file. Here we have the REST API file. And here's how you're going to see when we create it, and we are actually able to parse everything. This is one thing to consider because not every collection is written in the right way, but most of it, as long as you're going with Swagger files, are going to be correct and you won't have any troubles. But I just wanted to show you that case, at least with it. And what you're going to see, it's, again, you're going to have the connector name already pre-built, the same for the description. And here you'll have like everything for the different services that you can get. For example, you'll get services for contacts by ID, expense reports. And this is necessary because then we're just going to see how we use this. I'm just going to create it. So now we already have this. Here we'll define what's our base URL. This is a good thing because, again, here, for example, we just use a file that gets us all the definition from the API, but the definition, of course, has some placeholders. So the things that we need to update. So let's say I just want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. Then we can define if we have pagination or not, the content types and everything. Let me just hit save. Then we can define authentication. For example, in this case, this uses OAuth 2.0, but we could define like API key, personal access token, or different authentications method that we want, and also add some custom parameters if we actually need them. This is basically just going to help us to define the authentication for the different APIs in standard way for everything. And again, here we'll have the info, and here we'll have all the different resources that we're able to have as we were just showing in the previous one. So let's just hit save. And I think it said fail to save. Let's see if it turns over. I think it should be saved anyways, but let's just go to integration service. Let's see, our connector should be here. Okay, we created this one, already had one. Then to just use it, we'll need to create a connection for it. So go to connections, add connections, and we'll add it. But one thing is going to be easier is just show it from here. So let's just create a new sequence. To be able to use our connectors, we're just going to have to install this package. It's actually connector builder. And this will allow you to access all the activities that will let you consume the API. So here you have an install integration service, we'll have connector builder. And then depending on what we want to do, we have different activities. And this will actually list us all of the different things that we want to do from our connector. Right, so let's just open the definition again. So we'll see everything from our connector. So say we have contacts, and this is a get for listing all the contacts, but this is just getting a specific one by ID. This is just a pause and a delete. And so here we'll have an update if we have. Then we have list all the records. We have to insert a new record. We have to get one specific one and delete a record. So one thing we're going to do is just let's add list all the records. Here we'll need to be able, I need to create my connection to it. Otherwise, we're not going to see anything. What was the name we said it was? Okay, let's just use the one already created just easily so I don't have to create the connection. But that's why I can prepare it. So basically the one I created because I have access to test the API is the one for Trello. So it's just build an API for Trello and we have it here. Again, the only thing that I did differently from it is I define all of this manually. And something that you just go here, create a new resource group. We'll have boards, for example, and then we can just add different methods. So I have this list of methods. I have my base API, it's Trello API. I don't have authentication because I'm just going to use API tokens. So I can do that on each specific activity. And that, for example, let's say I want to list all of my boards, right? So what I do is I have my list or records. Then I'm just going to select my connector. I'm going to select the different connections that I have for it. In this case, I have the default and another one that I created previously. And then the only thing that I do is select the object that I want. I want to select my board cards or all my boards. And that's something that we're seeing it because I have a get for all my cardboards, or I have to get all my boards. And one thing that's good here is as soon as we do that, I have API key, it's a little bit longer, so no trouble, token, and then I'm just having my results boards. And one thing that is really cool about this, it's going to create variable types for it that will allow us to access all the different properties that we have. So in this API that we just have here, we define this as the input parameters that we have, key and token. And here we have the different response fields. So here I have everything that I was able to parse in my API. So for example, we're going to be able to query the ID, and I think we just can order this so we make it a little bit easier. Different labels and stuff, but I'm also going to be able to access the name. And the good thing about this is that I'm wanna be using that variable, I'm just going to iterate over the results boards. I will have access to, I think this is a little bit annoying. It should disappear. I'm going to have access to the different fields that I just defined that I have as part of my variable. It's a good thing that integration service creates this specific type of variable because it makes it a lot easier for us to just access the different data that we need from that. So here, the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this. It's basically just going to query Trello to get all my boards and print the IDs and the names. And we have the output, and here I have the different Ds, Airbnb, candidates database, Plug TV, etc. Right? So again, this is a simple solution on how she's built it manually. Again, she's started aggregating different resource groups and then adding the different methods. So I here define if it's a get record by ID, if it's an insert, upsert, update, or delete, or different list ones. It's funny because you won't be able to create more than one for this. For example, list methods, you can only create one. That's why the activities can get everything after that. But again, I have to do this manually because we weren't able to parse the Postman collection. But you should always try to first go with the different files and be able to generate all this automatically. Why? Because just think about how much time I would have saved if I have to do all of this manually instead of just using the file and getting access to the different activities all at the tip of my hand. I don't know if anyone has any questions regarding the custom activities with integration service. The main thing about that compared to creating libraries within Studio is that it will make it a lot easier for automating APIs. On the other hand, you will choose probably to build the libraries with Studio when you need to do them by just using the UI, for example, or different activities in UiPath. So you'll create the workflows and then build the libraries. But one thing that we had to do before integration service, I don't know like if anybody else happened to go through this, but we needed to do all with the UiPath activities for web. So you need to add the activity to do a REST API, and then you wrap that in the sequence and generated the library. But this is so much easier to create, much easier to handle, and creating different connections is so much easier that it will save you a lot of time if you use the integration service to manage your libraries.
Thanks, Nico.
All right, Mason, is it your setup working a little bit better?
Yeah, we got it. We got it sorted out.
Okay, perfect.
Had to activate the pro trial license because it, like, for some reason, Orchestrator just decided to get rid of all of my development licenses randomly. All right. I share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so what I've got here is, just like Tracy was showing, a library. This is just a simple library. This is my go-to demo. It's just I go to a cryptocurrency site and then I scrape the stuff off of it. I want to show you guys a little bit of what putting these things into source control looks like, because I know we had some questions about that in the first session. I didn't really get into it on the test-driven development session. In this one, I think source control is a pretty good way to manage your your project dependencies and make things reusable and shareable across your team of developers. So I'm going to demonstrate how that looks. So I'm going to go to, I have a GitHub. Let's see. This is my GitHub org. So I'm going to create a quick repository up here. I'm just going to call it Best Practices Demo. And this is in GitHub. You can use any Git source control the same way. So this will work with things like GitLab, Bitbucket, anything that's using Git on the underlying like technology stack. So GitHub, there's GitHub Enterprise. Some places use Azure DevOps ADO. So this will work with all of those. How you create the repository will be different across those. So here I'm going to go through GitHub's UI. You can create the repository locally on Studio, actually. And you can do it in many different ways. I'm going to create this one public. And what that means is that all of us can see it. So this is anybody that goes to GitHub can see this repository from anywhere. Private means that only people in my organization can see it. I'm going to make it public so all you guys can go and download it later. I'm going to go ahead and create it. All right, so I get this best practices demo.git. And this is my clone link. So you're always going to have some kind of URL for every different provider. It's different. So ADO has one, GitLab has one. GitHub uses this, so it's going to be github.com, the organization, the repo name, and then .git. So I'm going to copy this guy and go back to Studio. And there's multiple ways you can do this. So the first one is if you go up to home here in team, you can clone a repository down. So that would be if there's already a repository existing that has some code in it, you can clone it from there. I did just create that repository, but I'm not going to clone it. I'm actually going to try to push my code up to that because that's a blank repository. It's just a clean slate. There's no UiPath project or anything there. You can copy your current one to Git, or you can init. I'm actually going to select this init one. So this is adding the current project to a new local Git repository. Oh, sorry, that's to add it to a local one. I'm going to copy to Git. No. Shoot. I think I did it out of order here. Give me a second. I'm going to start. Go in here. You actually have to go in from this UI to do that. So those two would be if you were creating a repository locally. So it's going to create a repository in the folder that you're working from. So locally on your Windows instance, like if you're using Windows or you're using Linux, there's going to be a folder and it's going to have like a .git file in there. And that's going to be tracking all of your Git changes. And then the remote repository is that's stored up in like GitHub, GitLabs, or anything. Git init. So I'm going to go ahead and init this. And this is typically how I do it. So I'm doing this from this project. You're going to see a lot of checkboxes, some pluses. That is the way of Studio telling you, like, do you want to add this folder? Do you want to add these files? The plus means it's a totally new file. You'll see a little pencil on here if it's changed, or a check mark if it's up to date. You can have an initial commit. So when you make a change in Git, every time you make a change, you commit that change, and then you can push that to the local repository. Pushing pushes all of the changes that you've made. Commits are like the smaller changes that you've made. So I'm just going to call this one initialize. And what this does is it creates the Git folder locally. So if I was to open I can't do it right now because I'm blocked by the UI. But if I was to open this folder, we would see a .git folder there, and I'll show you what that looks like later once we've gone through the remote repository. But that's creating that locally. Right now, it exists on my computer and only my computer. It doesn't exist up in GitHub yet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a remote repository. So I've created the local one, and now I want to create the remote one. So that's the one that's actually up in GitHub. And that's that link that we copied from GitHub. So that's the GitHub Silver Incorporated Best Practices demo. Okay. Add that in URL, and I just call this remote. You can have multiple remotes, so you can push to multiple repositories at the same time. If for some reason you're using ADO and GitHub at the same time, maybe you're migrating from one to the other, and your security team wants you to have both, then you can do that, and every change that you make goes to both. Right now, I'm just going to create this one remote. I'm going to save it. And you'll see down here in the output, there are changes were pushed successfully to remote/main. So now if I go to GitHub, you'll see my project is actually up here. So in Best Practices demo, I've got my project. You'll see one commit 1 minute ago. So this commit was made. This is my initialized commit. So that was the first thing that I did here. Now I can make changes here. And I've already got a little bit of something set up here. So I've got a reusable component that opens a website. This site is just my test site. This is the site that I hit whenever I want to test something or demonstrate something. So what it does is it opens this website. Sorry, that wasn't opened in view for you guys. It opens this cryptocurrencies website. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scrape this table. And show you what that looks like. So if you're thinking about this as reusable components, I can make this a login activity. So this is my open site. And you see this little like gray line connected to a dot. That means that it's up to date in the remote repository and there are no changes to the file, right? If I want to make a change here, so open site already works. We've got open always, close never in my settings here. I'm going to go here to scrape prices. And today this is never opening, never closing. So it's just taking it if it's already open, attaching to that browser. So I can make a change here and say, let's just do a quick get text, make things easy. All right, so I can indicate my target on my screen. The site isn't open, so I'm going to run my open site again. And it'll open the site. Didn't do it in view. There we go. So you guys can see it. And now that I've made this change, you'll actually notice this pencil appears here. And so what that means is that file has changed. If I indicate the target, oh, you're not connecting today. Oh. Give me a second. I'm going to switch this to Edge real fast.
I know it's 1 o'clock, so if any of you needed to drop, please feel free.
Yeah, I'm not going to worry about getting this working. Let's just put a log message in here. So if I wanted to update this change over on GitHub, I would then come over here to the right, or to the left, right click on one of my files that has changed, right? And then I could commit this little check mark here, and it's going to show me the files that have changed. So whatever I've made an update to. So I added a log message. I'm going to put that as part of my commit to scrape prices, right? So my commit says what I did. And you try to make these as atomic as possible, as small as possible. So you're trying to commit as often as you can when you have like a working change or even a partial change on a commit. And so I'm going to commit that. I could have commit and push, but I want to do that separately to show you the difference. So now that I've committed this, you'll see I got this gray guy. That means it's updated locally, but I still haven't pushed it to the remote repository, right? If I open up that remote repository real fast. It's hard to see, but that activity doesn't exist here in this code. If I search for hello, my hello log message isn't here yet, right? Now, pushing will actually put that change in the code up on GitHub. So now my changes are pushed. So I right-clicked here and I hit push. You can also come down here to this pencil, and this pencil will push up to GitHub as well. And if I update this page and then Control F for hello again, I should see it. Can't type today. There we go. So now my log message is in here. And this is just the XAML for that log message activity. If I was to pull this down into Studio, you would see that change. If I add a new file, so add another sequence in here. This one's a lot easier to see on the GitHub side. So new sequence. So I've got this new sequence, and it has a little green plus on there. So that's a new file entirely. If I commit that, so it says it's gray here, it's updated. But when I go to GitHub, you're not going to see the new sequence file in my code. So there's no new sequence file here yet. If I make my push right here, changes are pushed successfully to remote/main. And I refresh this. So my new sequence is here. So this is how you kind of maintain your code up in GitHub when you're developing and you're actively changing it. Another example of this is, so let's say I wanted to grab, say Tracy put her library up here in my organization, for example. Then I could go up here and see the repositories that exist. And these are all my repositories. I can pull any of these down into Studio with that clone function that I showed earlier. And I actually want to show you guys how that works. So this one is a public one. If you go to silverincorporated.s.orchestrator.api, this is a library that can hit the orchestrator API. So you can do things like add queues or delete queues, add folders and whatnot. And I just host this publicly. So so that anybody can use it. If I hit this code, and then this is my clone link again, I can actually pull this down in a new project. So there's a cloner checkout here, as well as in team clone repository. These do the same thing, cloner checkout and this team clone repository. So I'm going to go ahead and clone that, open it. And if it's a public one like this, you won't have to authenticate or anything. It'll just let you do it. If it's not a public one, you might have to authenticate against your organization. And that should be just a quick link that takes you over to Chrome and authenticates you. So now what you'll see is I have all of the code that was up there in GitHub pulled down. And if I want to make a change to that, I can change it right here and then push that back up and make the update into GitHub. So this is a very nice way to manage all of your projects. And if somebody else was to push a project up there and you wanted to, make changes to it, you can very easily pull it down and push your changes up there as well. And it makes that management a lot easier. It's easier than having a centralized, like, if you're working from like a shared drive, only one person can open the file at a time. Only one person can open that entire project at a time. In GitHub, multiple people can have that pulled down and be making changes to it like asynchronously, and then combine those changes together. So that's really cool. And that's one of the most helpful features of it. When you're talking about reusability, maybe one of your library components is maintained up in a GitHub repository, and you make an update to it, you need to push it out to all your projects. GitHub has the ability to do that. It can manage your library version dependencies inherently, and so you can programmatically interact with GitHub. So Nico showed you all an integration service component that he built custom. There's already a GitHub component out there, and you can interact with these GitHub repositories directly through integration service. So there's a lot more opportunities that become available when you start managing your code this way. And it's not necessarily like a reusable component built out with a library, but it's a reusable way of thinking about maintaining and building your code. So I like to do it a lot. That's it.
All right. Any questions for Mason before we wrap up? All right. So if any of you, I did see some issues with being able to see the screen. I could see it throughout, so it should be in the video recording. You're welcome to go back and take a look at that. We normally will have that posted by tomorrow. So thanks everybody for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you again in a few weeks.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for having me on. All right. See ya.
See you later.